The late afternoon sun beats down on a busy downtown street. People are moving quickly, rushing to catch buses, heading home from work, or stepping into cafes. In the middle of the sidewalk, a sudden commotion breaks the flow. A police cruiser screeches to a halt, the sharp sound of tires cutting through the hum of the city. Two officers step out. One of them, Officer Daniels, a tall white cop with a sneer etched on his face, locks eyes on a black woman carrying grocery bags. She's dressed simply, in jeans and a loose sweater, but she walks with quiet dignity. Her name is Angela Carter. Daniels points at her and barks, "Hey you, stop right there!" His voice cuts through the crowd, startling everyone nearby. People slow down, curious, pulling out their phones to record. Angela pauses, confused. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asks calmly, her voice steady despite the sudden spotlight on her. Daniels doesn't answer. Instead, he strides forward, grabs her by the arm and twists it roughly behind her back. The groceries tumble to the ground, apples rolling across the pavement, a carton of milk bursting open and spilling white streams along the sidewalk. "Hands behind your back. You're under arrest," he growls, snapping cold steel handcuffs onto her wrists. Angela flinches but doesn't resist. "What are you arresting me for?" she asks, her tone still measured but edged with disbelief. The crowd murmurs. Someone yells, "She didn't do anything." Another voice shouts, "Leave her alone!" But Daniels ignores them. Instead, he smirks and says loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Resisting arrest, disorderly conduct, I'll figure it out later." Gasps ripple through the crowd. Phones are raised higher, cameras zoom in. The other officer looks uneasy but doesn't intervene. Daniels yanks Angela forward, dragging her across the sidewalk. Her sweater catches on the pavement, tearing at the sleeve. The cuffs dig into her wrists, leaving red marks. The humiliation stings deeper than the pain, but she holds her head high, refusing to let him see her break. "Walk faster," he snaps, giving her another shove. "Sir, I'm pregnant," Angela says suddenly, her voice louder now, desperate for him to hear. The crowd reacts with shock, shouts of anger rising. But Daniels only laughs, a harsh sound that echoes across the street. "Pregnant? That's your excuse? You think I care?" He drags her closer to the cruiser. The camera phones capture every second. The image of a pregnant black woman, cuffed and pulled like a criminal, spreads instantly across social media. Twitter notifications buzz in pockets. TikTok live streams light up with furious comments. A teenager in the crowd yells, "That's abuse! She's pregnant!" Others join in, chanting angrily at the cop, but Daniels only sneers, pushing Angela harder. Inside the cuffs, Angela steadies her breathing. She knows panic won't help. What Daniels doesn't know, what the crowd doesn't yet know, is that she isn't alone. Her husband, Marcus Carter, is just minutes away, and Marcus isn't an ordinary man. He's a senior FBI agent with a reputation for tearing down corrupt cops. As Daniels shoves Angela against the side of the cruiser, preparing to throw her inside, the crowd's noise swells. Horns blare from nearby traffic. People press closer, anger thick in the air. Daniels growls at them, hand instinctively reaching toward his taser, but his arrogance keeps him from realizing that his control of the situation is slipping fast. Angela closes her eyes, whispers to herself, and waits, because she knows Marcus. And Marcus is already on his way. The crowd's outrage builds like a storm. Dozens of voices now demand answers, cameras recording every second. Angela leans against the cruiser, cuffs digging into her skin, the humiliation heavy. But her eyes stay forward, calm, steady, because she knows what's coming. Down the street, a black SUV cuts through traffic, horn blaring. The vehicle swerves into the curb and stops sharply. The driver's door swings open and out steps Marcus Carter. Tall, broad-shouldered, suit jacket flaring behind him, he moves with the deliberate stride of someone used to commanding a room or a battlefield. The crowd parts instinctively, sensing authority. Gasps ripple as someone whispers, "That's her husband." Marcus's eyes lock on Angela, cuffed and bruised, and the calm mask cracks. Fury flashes across his face. He storms forward, voice booming. "What do you think you're doing to my wife?" Daniel straightens, startled, but arrogance fuels him. "Back off. She resisted arrest." "She's pregnant!" Marcus roars, stepping closer until he's face to face with the officer. His presence radiates control, a quiet danger beneath the fury. Daniel sneers. "Doesn't matter. She broke the law." Marcus pulls a leather wallet from his inner pocket and flips it open, the gold shield gleaming in the sunlight. The letters are unmistakable. Federal Bureau of Investigation. The crowd gasps again, louder this time. Phones zoom in on the badge, capturing the exact moment arrogance collapses into fear. "I'm Agent Marcus Carter," he says, voice steady, sharp enough to cut glass, "and the woman you're dragging across the street is my wife. You just made the biggest mistake of your career." Daniels's bravado falters. His eyes dart to the badge, then to the cameras, then back to Marcus. Sweat beads at his temple. He stammers, I didn't know." "You didn't care," Marcus interrupts coldly. He steps closer, towering over the cop. "You thought humiliating her in public would make you powerful. All you did was expose yourself." The crowd erupts in cheers, chants of justice, echoing off the buildings. Strangers clap, some wiping angry tears from their eyes. Angela lifts her chin, her voice clear and strong despite the cuffs. "Marcus, I told him I was pregnant." He laughed. The words strike the crowd like a hammer. Murmurs turn into shouts of outrage. Daniels takes a step back, but Marcus doesn't let up. "You laughed at a pregnant woman. You dragged her in front of dozens of witnesses. And you did it in the middle of the city where every camera is watching. Do you have any idea what that means?" Daniels swallows hard, his hands trembling now. His partner shifts uncomfortably, eyes darting anywhere but the scene. Marcus lowers his voice, lethal in its calm. "It means your career is over." He turns to the crowd, raising his voice. "Everyone here, keep your videos. Send them to the press, send them to the city, send them to me. This man will answer for what he's done." Cheers roar louder. People chant Angela's name. Cars stop, drivers honking in support, fists raised from open windows. The street transforms into a rally for justice, a spontaneous protest sparked by one act of cruelty and one act of defiance. Marcus pulls out his phone, dials a number, and speaks with military precision. "This is Agent Carter. I need internal affairs on site now. Officer Daniels has unlawfully detained a civilian, my wife, and she's pregnant." The words hit Daniels harder than any punch. He freezes, color draining from his face as he realizes the weight of what's unfolding. Angela's calm voice breaks the tension. "Marcus, can you take these off me, please?" Marcus turns, his eyes softening as he looks at her. Gently, he unlocks the cuffs with a key handed over by the other silent officer. The crowd cheers again, louder than before. Angela rubs her wrists, red and sore, but she stands tall, her dignity intact. Marcus takes her hand, raising it high for the crowd to see. "This is my wife. This is the woman you tried to destroy in public. She will not be silenced, and neither will I." Daniels tries one last defense. You can't just end my career over this." Marcus turns back, his stare like steel. "You ended it yourself the moment you chose to abuse your badge. Now the world will see exactly who you are." The wail of sirens grows louder as internal affairs vehicles speed down the street. News vans pull up, reporters rushing out, microphones raised, cameras rolling. The entire city will know within the hour. And in that moment, under the flashing lights and roaring crowd, Marcus Carter knows one thing. Justice isn't just coming. It's already here. The sirens cut through the air, echoing off the walls of surrounding buildings. The flashing red and blue lights reflected on shop windows as 3 unmarked vehicles screeched to a halt. Doors swung open and out stepped men and women in suits, internal affairs investigators. Their presence alone shifted the atmosphere. The crowd surged forward, voices rising like a tidal wave. "Justice! Justice!" they shouted, their chants filling the entire street. Angela, her wrists still raw from the cuffs, stood taller now, emboldened by the sea of strangers who had become her shield. Marcus didn't flinch as the agents approached. One of them, a tall woman with sharp eyes and a stern voice, stepped directly between Marcus and Officer Daniels. "What's the situation here, Agent Carter?" she asked, already scanning Angela's wrists and the recording cell phones around them. Marcus's response was clipped, precise, professional, but laced with restrained fury. "Unlawful arrest, excessive force, public humiliation. The victim is pregnant. Officer Daniels ignored every warning, and now it's all on record." The agent turned to Daniels, her expression unreadable. "Is this true?" Daniels's voice cracked. "No, she resisted. I was following procedure." The agent raised a hand, cutting him off. "We have half the city recording you. Do you really want to stick to that story?" The crowd booed loudly, jeering. "Liar!" Someone shouted, "We saw everything." Angela took a breath, stepping forward. Though her body ached, her voice carried across the crowd. "He dragged me like I was nothing. I told him I was carrying a child and he laughed in my face." The agent's jaw tightened. She turned to her team. "Take Officer Daniels into custody, effective immediately." The crowd exploded with cheers, the sound deafening, rattling windows. Daniels sputtered in disbelief, his face pale, his eyes darting from Marcus to the cameras capturing his downfall. "You can't do this to me," he shouted. But two internal affairs officers grabbed his arms, locking handcuffs onto the wrists that had bruised Angela's only minutes earlier. Marcus watched silently, his arm around his wife's shoulders, his stance protective yet unyielding. Angela leaned into him, but her gaze never left Daniels. For the first time, the power dynamic shifted entirely. He wasn't the enforcer anymore. He was the criminal. News reporters swarmed closer, microphones extended, cameras zooming in. "Agent Carter, is this the beginning of a federal case?" one shouted. Marcus didn't hesitate. "It's not the beginning, it's the consequence. Actions like this end careers. They destroy lives. And today, they stop here." The chant began again, louder this time. "Stop here! Stop here!" The voices of ordinary citizens fused into something unstoppable, something bigger than just one case. The agent leading the team gave Marcus a respectful nod. "We'll handle it from here, Agent Carter. You and your wife should get checked by medics." But Marcus shook his head. "We'll go to the hospital on our own. My wife deserves dignity, not another spectacle." Angela smiled faintly, her hand tightening in his. "I'm fine. Let's just go." Before they could leave, a young woman from the crowd stepped forward. Tears streaked her cheeks as she held up her phone. "I recorded everything, the whole thing. It's already live online. Millions are watching." The ripple of her words spread fast. People raised their phones higher, showing Angela and Marcus that their story was being broadcast across the world. The chants became thunderous, rolling like waves. "Justice for Angela! Justice for Angela!" Daniels, shoved into the back of a cruiser, looked out through the window, his face twisted in regret and disbelief. He had no control now, only the weight of his own actions crushing down on him. Marcus led Angela gently toward their SUV. Every step felt heavier than the last, but also freer. For Angela, the bruises on her wrists would fade, but the sight of the crowd rising for her, strangers becoming allies, etched itself permanently in her memory. As the doors closed behind them, Marcus whispered softly so only she could hear, "He'll never hurt you again. Not while I'm here." Angela turned her head toward him, eyes glistening. "I didn't need him to respect me, but I'm glad the world saw the truth." The SUV pulled away, leaving behind the chaos of flashing lights, chanting voices, and the downfall of one man who thought he was untouchable. And as they disappeared into the distance, the city's roar carried a single message. Justice had finally caught up. The drive to the hospital was silent at first, broken only by the hum of the engine and the occasional flash of streetlights washing over their faces. Angela leaned back against the seat, her wrists tender, her body sore, but her spirit unbroken. Marcus gripped the steering wheel firmly, eyes fixed ahead, every muscle taut with restrained anger. "You should have let them call an ambulance," he muttered finally, his voice low. Angela shook her head. "No, I didn't want to be surrounded by flashing lights again. Not after that." Her voice cracked slightly, but she steadied herself. "I just need a moment to breathe." Marcus glanced at her, his jaw softening. "You were brave back there. Braver than anyone had a right to be in that situation." "I didn't feel brave," Angela admitted, her fingers brushing over the faint bruises left by the cuffs. "I felt humiliated. But then I saw all those people. Strangers shouting for me. For us. That gave me strength." As they pulled into the hospital parking lot, reporters were already there, cameras flashing in the night. The story had spread like wildfire, hashtags trending, news outlets cutting into regular programming, anchors demanding answers. Marcus parked away from the crowd, guiding Angela through a side entrance. Hospital staff, already aware of what happened, moved quickly to escort them to a private room. Nurses whispered in hushed tones, eyes filled with sympathy and quiet outrage. The doctor entered swiftly, his face stern. "Mrs. Carter, we'll run some tests. Make sure everything is fine with your pregnancy." His voice softened. "And it will be, but we need to check." Angela nodded, lying back on the bed as the doctor began his examination. Marcus stood at her side, holding her hand tightly, every second stretching like hours. When the doctor finally smiled, the tension broke. "Your baby's heartbeat is strong. No complications detected. You're safe." Angela exhaled deeply, tears sliding down her cheeks, not from pain, but from relief. Marcus bent down, pressing his forehead to hers. "That's all I needed to hear," he whispered. But peace was fleeting. Marcus's phone buzzed relentlessly. Calls from Washington, messages from colleagues, notifications of the viral storm raging outside. He glanced at the screen. Millions of views, headlines screaming, "FBI agent's wife assaulted by cop, pregnant woman dragged in public sparks." Outrage. Angela saw the worry in his eyes. "It's bigger than us now, isn't it?" Marcus nodded slowly. "It always was, but now the whole world knows." Hours later, as dawn painted the sky in pale hues of orange and pink, they prepared to leave the hospital. The front doors were surrounded by cameras and microphones, but the hospital offered a discreet exit through the back. Marcus helped Angela into their SUV once more, but this time, the weight pressing on them felt different. Less personal, more purposeful. They drove home quietly, exhausted yet resolute, but their home was no longer a sanctuary. News vans lined the street, neighbors gathered, signs already appearing on lawns. "Justice for Angela, stop police abuse, protect black mothers." Marcus sighed. "There's no putting this back in the box." Angela touched his arm gently. "Maybe that's the point. Maybe it's not supposed to go back in." The next day, hearings were scheduled. Officer Daniels's name trended for all the wrong reasons. Politicians demanded accountability, activists rallied, and legal experts dissected the footage. The weight of truth pressed down on the system, forcing cracks into the walls that once protected men like Daniels. When Angela stepped outside her home to greet the growing crowd, silence rippled through them. She wore no makeup, no dramatic clothing, just a simple dress and quiet strength. "I never asked for this," she said, her voice steady but emotional. "But I won't let what happened be forgotten. No woman, no mother should be treated this way. Not in our city, not in our country." The crowd erupted, chants thundering through the morning air. Marcus stood behind her, his hand on her shoulder, a silent pillar of support. Daniels, meanwhile, sat alone in a holding cell, his career evaporating by the hour. He thought of his arrogance, his smirk, the way he dismissed Angela's pleas. Now he had nothing but the sound of his own regret echoing against cold steel walls. As the sun rose higher, casting light on a city shaken but awakening, it became clear this wasn't just Angela's story anymore. It was a rallying cry, a reminder that dignity, respect, and justice were not privileges, they were rights. And for once, the world seemed to be listening. The courthouse buzzed with tension, the kind that prickled across the skin and lingered in the air like static. Reporters swarmed the steps, microphones extended like weapons, cameras flashing relentlessly. Headlines had already painted Officer Daniels as the face of arrogance and abuse. The trial would not just be about him, it would become a symbol of a system under fire. Angela arrived at the courthouse with Marcus by her side. She moved slowly, her pregnancy visible now, but her presence radiated quiet strength. The crowd outside erupted into chants. "Justice for Angela! Justice for mothers!" Security escorted them in, shielding them from the noise, but the chants echoed even within the marble halls. Inside the courtroom, Daniel sat stiffly at the defense table. His uniform had been stripped, his badge surrendered, leaving him in a plain suit that seemed to hang heavy on his shoulders. His eyes darted nervously toward Angela, but she never once looked away. The judge entered, the gavel striking sharply. "This court is now in session." The prosecution began with the footage, played across screens for all to see. The gasps that filled the room were immediate and sharp. Daniels dragging a pregnant woman in handcuffs, ignoring her pleas, ignoring the cries of onlookers. Every second of humiliation captured and replayed. Angela sat straight, her hands folded in her lap, her face composed though her eyes shimmered. She refused to let him see her break. Marcus, seated beside her, clenched his fists under the table, his jaw tight as steel. When Angela was called to the stand, the courtroom fell silent. She walked slowly, each step deliberate, her dress flowing softly around her. She swore the oath and took her seat, her gaze never faltering. The prosecutor asked gently, "Mrs. Carter, can you describe what happened that day?" Her voice was steady, though the weight of the memory pressed hard. I was walking home from the grocery store. I had 2 bags in my hands and Officer Daniels approached me. He accused me of loitering. I explained I was just heading home, but he ignored me, and when I tried to keep walking, he grabbed me. She paused, her throat tightening, but she pushed forward. I told him I was pregnant. He didn't care. He cuffed me, shoved me to the ground, and dragged me as if I were nothing. The courtroom was heavy with silence, every word settling like stone. "And how did that make you feel?" the prosecutor asked softly. Angela's eyes glistened, but her voice grew stronger. Humiliated, afraid, not just for me, but for my baby. But most of all, I felt invisible. Like my words, my body, my life didn't matter to him. The defense attorney rose, adjusting his tie, trying to pierce the sympathy in the room. "Mrs. Carter, isn't it true you resisted his orders?" Angela's head turned slowly toward him. "I resisted humiliation. I resisted being treated like less than human. If that is what you mean, then yes." The gallery erupted with murmurs, some clapping before the judge's gavel silenced them. Daniels was next on the stand. His tone was defensive, his words stumbling. "I followed protocol. She was non-compliant. Protocol?" The prosecutor cut in sharply. "Where in protocol does it say drag a pregnant woman through the street while she begs for her child's life?" Daniels faltered, sweat beading on his forehead. I made a judgment call. A judgment rooted in bias, not law," the prosecutor shot back, voice rising, "and the world saw it." The final blow came when Marcus himself was called forward. As an FBI agent, his testimony carried undeniable weight. Standing tall in his dark suit, his badge glinting under the courtroom lights, he addressed the jury. "That man didn't just assault my wife, he assaulted trust. He proved that some officers believe they're above accountability. But justice isn't a suggestion, it's a promise, and today I ask you to keep that promise." The jury deliberated for only 3 hours, a short time that spoke volumes. When they returned, the verdict was swift. Guilty on all charges. The gavel struck once more, and the room erupted. Cheers, tears, fists raised in triumph. Daniel sat frozen, the reality crashing over him like a tidal wave. His career was finished, his name forever stained. Angela closed her eyes, tears slipping down, but this time they were not of humiliation. They were of relief. Marcus pulled her close, his arms wrapping protectively around her. The crowd outside roared as news spread, chants rising into the sky like thunder. As they left the courthouse, reporters swarmed again, but Angela paused, turning to face the cameras. "This was never just about me. This was about every woman who has been silenced, every life dismissed. Today we proved that dignity cannot be handcuffed. Justice will not be dragged away." The city listened. The nation listened. And for the first time in a long while, Angela felt the world had not only seen her, but heard her. The courthouse steps were packed with people, their voices rising into the afternoon air. Reporters jostled for position, microphones extended, cameras capturing every angle of the moment. Angela and Marcus emerged, the bright sun washing over them like a spotlight. Angela paused at the top of the stairs, Marcus steady at her side. She held her head high, her posture strong despite the exhaustion that weighed on her shoulders. The chants began again, louder now, a single word echoing across the city. "Justice! Justice! Justice!" She raised her hand gently and the crowd hushed. The silence was powerful, charged with anticipation. Angela's voice carried, steady and clear. "Today the system worked the way it should. But let us not forget, it failed me before it protected me. It failed too many others whose stories never reached this stage. What happened to me is not unique, but what we do after today, that will define us." Her words struck deep. For some, they were a call to arms. For others, a moment of reflection. The cameras captured every flicker of emotion across her face, every ounce of truth in her voice. Behind her, Marcus placed his hand gently over hers, his presence firm but supportive. He wasn't there to speak, he was there to amplify her strength. The nation had seen an FBI agent defend his wife in court, but today, they saw a husband who believed in her power. As they descended the stairs, the crowd surged forward, not with aggression but with solidarity. Strangers reached out, touching Angela's arm, whispering words of gratitude, tears in their eyes. Some held signs: "Protect Black mothers, dignity for all, no more silence." The image spread quickly. Within hours, television broadcasts, social media feeds, and newspapers were filled with Angela's face, her words replayed endlessly. Hashtags trended worldwide. People who had never met her now carried her name as a banner of resilience. But change is never immediate, and Angela knew this. That evening, in the quiet of their living room, she sat on the couch, a cup of tea in her hands. The house was filled with flowers from neighbors, letters slid under their door, and messages of solidarity buzzing her phone. Yet exhaustion pressed down on her bones. Marcus joined her, his tie loosened, his eyes soft with concern. "You did it," he whispered. "You stood taller than anyone could have imagined." Angela shook her head gently. "We did it. Together. But tomorrow, someone else will face what I faced. And I don't want them to feel as powerless as I did in those first moments." Marcus leaned closer. "Then we keep fighting. Not just for us, but for them." The following week, Angela received an invitation to speak at a community forum. At first, she hesitated. She wasn't a politician, not an activist by trade. She was simply a woman who wanted to live her life in peace. But when she looked at the invitation again, she thought of the chants outside the courthouse, the tears of strangers who saw themselves in her struggle. She agreed. That night, the hall was filled to capacity. Mothers, fathers, students, elders, they gathered not just to hear a story, but to find hope. Angela walked to the podium, her steps measured, her dress simple. She spoke not with anger but with conviction. "I was humiliated in public, but what happened after showed me something greater, that our voices together are stronger than any badge misused, stronger than any law bent against us. I am not here to relive my pain, I am here to turn it into purpose." The applause that followed was thunderous, but Angela's words lingered longer than the clapping. People left the hall with their shoulders a little straighter, their spirits a little higher. The story spread further. News anchors referred to Angela as a symbol of dignity. Editorials called her case a turning point. Civil rights leaders reached out, offering partnerships. Invitations poured in, from universities, organizations, even lawmakers who wanted her perspective on reforms. One evening, Marcus came home to find her surrounded by letters on the dining table. She looked up, tears in her eyes, but this time they were tears of being seen. "They keep saying I gave them hope," she whispered. Marcus kissed her forehead. "Because you did." Months later, Angela stood again before cameras, this time not as a victim but as a leader. She testified before Congress, urging stronger protections for pregnant women in custody, mandatory de-escalation training for officers, and accountability measures that could no longer be ignored. Her testimony shook the chamber, the weight of her lived truth undeniable. Daniels, meanwhile, faded from the public eye, his name a cautionary tale. But Angela rose. She wasn't looking for fame. She wasn't chasing power. She wanted change, real and lasting. And because of her, countless others began to believe it was possible. When she finally returned home that night, Marcus waiting for her, she exhaled deeply. For the first time in months, the weight seemed lighter. She placed her hand gently on her stomach, feeling the faintest kick of the life growing inside her. "Justice," she whispered, a promise to her child. "You will be born into a world where dignity stands taller than fear." And in that quiet moment, away from the noise of cameras and crowds, Angela Carter smiled. The world had tried to drag her down. Instead, she rose, and with her, a movement. Months passed, yet the image of Angela Carter standing on those courthouse steps remained vivid in the public mind. For many, it was more than just a headline, it was a turning point. People replayed her words online, quoting her speeches in classrooms, churches, and even congressional hearings. She had become, almost against her will, the face of a movement. But Angela never forgot the beginning. The sting of hot coffee splashing against her skin, the sneer of an officer who thought power was his shield. That memory fueled her, but it did not consume her. She refused to be defined by humiliation. Instead, she built her identity around resilience. At home, life was changing too. The nursery was painted a soft blue, sunlight streaming in through sheer curtains. Marcus had built the crib with his own hands, every nail driven in with the care of a man who wanted to shield his child from every cruelty of the world. They spent evenings folding baby clothes, laughing at the tiny socks, and imagining the future. But the outside world never stopped knocking. Invitations to speak grew more frequent, some from small community centers, others from national conferences. Marcus worried. "You need to rest," he reminded her gently one night. "The baby, our baby, needs you healthy." Angela smiled, her hand resting on her belly. And what kind of mother would I be if I stayed silent, knowing this child might grow up facing the same hatred I did? If I can change even a fraction of that world, it's worth the exhaustion. Marcus didn't argue further. He knew her strength wasn't something to restrain, it was something to protect. Her first major address came at Howard University, a historic institution filled with students hungry for inspiration. The auditorium was packed, the air electric. Angela walked onto the stage in a simple navy dress. No teleprompter, no scripted lines. She spoke from the heart. "They tried to strip me of my dignity in front of strangers, but dignity is not something you can take, it's something you must surrender." And I refused. I stood because I knew I was not standing just for myself. I was standing for my mother, who endured insults in silence. For my grandmother, who worked 3 jobs and still faced closed doors. For every young woman sitting in this room who will one day be told she is less. To them I say, you are not less. You are enough. More than enough. The applause shook the walls. Students rose to their feet, tears streaming down faces, hands clapping in rhythm. In that moment, Angela realized her story had grown bigger than her. It had become a torch others were ready to carry. Back in Washington, lawmakers had taken notice. A new bill was introduced, focused on police accountability, de-escalation training, and protections for expectant mothers in custody. Angela was invited to testify again, this time alongside civil rights leaders and policy experts. She spoke with precision, her testimony laced with lived truth. Even skeptical senators found themselves leaning forward, listening. Afterward, one senator approached her quietly. "You reminded us what this job is supposed to be about," he admitted. The bill would not solve everything. Angela knew that, but it was a step, and steps, when taken together, built roads. Meanwhile, Daniels, the officer who had humiliated her, remained suspended, his name a symbol of disgrace. Angela did not speak of him often. He wasn't the story anymore. The story was what came after. The unity, the voices, the change. As her due date neared, Angela slowed her schedule. One evening, she and Marcus walked through their neighborhood hand in hand. Neighbors stopped them, offering blessings, gifts, and prayers. "You gave us courage," one elderly woman said, pressing Angela's hand. "We'll be telling our grandchildren about you." Angela blushed, humbled. She didn't see herself as a hero. She was just a woman who had been wronged, who chose to speak instead of shrinking. The night their daughter was born, the world seemed to pause. In the delivery room, Marcus held Angela's hand, his eyes glistening as he whispered, "She's here." Angela, exhausted but radiant, looked at the tiny life placed in her arms. The baby's cry filled the room, fierce and strong. She kissed her forehead, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Welcome, Justice," she whispered, giving her daughter a name that carried the weight of everything she had fought for. News of the birth spread quickly. Headlines framed it as symbolic. Angela Carter, the woman who stood for dignity, names her daughter Justice. People across the country celebrated as if she belonged to them too, as if the child represented a new chapter for everyone who had endured silence. Weeks later, Angela returned briefly to the spotlight, holding Justice in her arms as she stood before a rally. She didn't speak long, she didn't need to. She simply held up her daughter for the crowd to see. "This is why we fight," she said softly into the microphone. The roar of the crowd was deafening. From that moment on, the story of Angela Carter was no longer just about humiliation or survival. It was about legacy, about passing the torch of courage to the next generation. Daniels and his cruelty had become a footnote. What endured was Angela's defiance, Marcus's loyalty, and a little girl named Justice who had entered the world already surrounded by hope. The movement lived on, not because of anger alone, but because one woman decided that dignity could not be stolen, and that sometimes the most powerful revolution begins with a single voice refusing to be silenced. Justice was only a few weeks old, yet her presence seemed to shift everything around Angela and Marcus. Their small home became a gathering place. Neighbors dropped by with food, activists came to brainstorm, journalists begged for interviews. Angela tried to protect her family's privacy, but she also understood the symbolism. People didn't just see her as a woman anymore. They saw her as a mother, carrying the weight of a future. Late one night, while Justice slept peacefully, Angela sat on the couch scrolling through messages. Letters from women who had faced discrimination at work, notes from mothers whose sons had been profiled, messages from teenagers saying they finally felt seen. She placed her phone down and whispered, "This is bigger than me." Marcus wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "It's always been bigger than you," he said. "But now they know it too." The next week, Angela received an invitation to appear on national television, prime time. She hesitated. "I don't want this to become about fame," she admitted to Marcus. "It's about the issue, not me." He nodded. "Then make sure you remind them of that." So she did. On live TV, Angela's words were calm but piercing. She spoke not of herself, but of systemic change, of the need for accountability, of her desire for her daughter to grow up in a country where dignity wasn't conditional. Millions watched, and social media erupted. Clips of her interview went viral. "This woman speaks truth," one post read. "She's the future," another declared. But attention had its costs. Protesters gathered outside their home, some supportive, others hostile. Anonymous letters arrived, some filled with threats. One night, Marcus noticed a car parked too long on their street. He tightened security, made calls, and ensured their home was protected. Angela wasn't naive. She knew visibility came with risk. Still, she pressed forward. She began working with grassroots organizations, connecting families, offering mentorship to young women, and speaking to law schools about justice. At one event, a young law student stood up and asked, "How do you stay strong when they try to break you?" Angela looked at her and smiled. "Because I know they can't break me unless I let them, and because I'm not standing alone. Every time one of you stands with me, their power weakens." The student cried, and the room erupted in applause. Meanwhile, the suspended officer Daniels finally faced trial. Angela was called as a witness. Standing in the courtroom, she saw him for the first time since that humiliating day. He avoided her gaze, shoulders hunched. The once arrogant smirk was gone. Her testimony was steady. She did not shout. She did not seek revenge. She simply told the truth, clear, undeniable, and powerful. When the verdict is guilty of misconduct and abuse of authority, the room sighed in relief. But Angela did not celebrate. She turned to reporters and said, "This is not the end. Removing one man does not fix the system. We must keep pushing." That statement became another rallying cry. At home, Marcus noticed the toll on her. Some nights she collapsed into his arms, exhausted. Yet every morning she rose again. Justice would giggle in her crib, and Angela would whisper, "You're why I keep going." Months later, Angela received a call she never expected, an invitation to meet the president at the White House. Marcus insisted she accept. "If they're listening at that level, you need to speak." So she did. In the Oval Office, Angela sat across from the president, Justice in her lap. Cameras weren't present. This wasn't about publicity. She spoke plainly about reform, about communities in pain, about the need for change that was more than symbolic. The president listened carefully, promising to back new legislation. Walking out of the White House, Angela felt the weight of history pressing on her shoulders. She turned to Marcus and whispered, "This isn't just my fight anymore. It belongs to everyone who refuses to stay silent." In the weeks that followed, new laws were introduced. Police training programs began shifting. Communities organized stronger. Angela's face appeared on posters, murals, and even in classrooms as part of history lessons. She remained humble, repeating the same line, "I'm not a hero, I'm just a woman who said enough." One evening, she returned to Howard University, this time with Justice in her arms. The same students who had cheered months earlier stood again, louder than ever. Angela lifted Justice above her head and said, "This is why we fight, so she and all children like her never have to wonder if their worth is questioned. So they know they belong." The roar was deafening. Students chanted her name, but Angela shook her head, pointing to the crowd. "It's not about me, it's about us." Justice cooed in her arms, as if adding her tiny voice to the chorus. Angela smiled, her eyes glistening. The story that had begun with coffee and humiliation had become something far greater, a movement, a legacy, a promise. And she knew this was only the beginning, because when one woman stood, she showed the world that silence was no longer an option, and that dignity, once defended, could never be taken again. Months passed, and the story of Angela and Justice spread far beyond Washington, D.C. News outlets replayed clips of Angela's speech until her words became etched into the national memory. But while fame lingered in headlines, Angela's daily life was far from glamorous. She still woke up early, packed Marcus's lunch, rocked Justice to sleep, and folded laundry late at night. The difference was that in between, she carried the weight of a movement. One Saturday, Angela was invited to speak at a memorial service for families who had lost loved ones to police brutality. Standing before rows of grieving faces, she felt her voice tremble. "I stand here not as someone who is fearless," she admitted, "but as someone who refuses to let fear silence me." After the service, an older woman approached her, holding a faded photo of her son. Tears streamed down her face. "I buried him 10 years ago," she whispered. "But today, I felt like his life meant something again." Angela embraced her, realizing that her journey wasn't only about Justice's future, it was about honoring lives already lost. Back at home, Marcus tried to shield Angela from the constant barrage of calls, emails, and invitations. "You need time for yourself," he insisted. But Angela shook her head. "This isn't about me. If I step back now, people will feel abandoned." Still, exhaustion loomed. Some nights, Angela sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at her notebook, unable to write a single word. Marcus would place a cup of tea beside her and remind her, "Movements are marathons, not sprints." Then came the trial of Officer Daniels. This time, Angela wasn't just a witness, she was a symbol. The courthouse buzzed with media vans and protesters carrying signs. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Daniels sat slouched at the defense table, his arrogance replaced with unease. Angela's testimony was powerful yet restrained. She recounted every detail, the sneer, the spilled coffee, the sting of humiliation. She didn't embellish, she didn't need to. Her truth was undeniable. When cross-examined, she remained calm, dismantling each attempt to discredit her. The jury returned with a verdict: guilty of misconduct, abuse of power, and perjury. Daniels was sentenced to time behind bars. Gasps echoed in the courtroom, followed by applause outside. But Angela felt no triumph. "This is not about one man in uniform," she told reporters. "This is about changing a system that allowed him to think he could act without consequence." Her restraint made headlines. Instead of vengeance, Angela demanded reform, and people listened. Soon after, Angela received a call from a civil rights coalition. They wanted her to lead a task force focused on training reform and accountability. It was an honor, but also a heavy burden. She accepted. The work was grueling. Long meetings, heated debates, and endless data filled her days. Angela sat with police chiefs, lawmakers, and community leaders. Some resisted her presence, questioning her experience, but she countered with undeniable conviction. "I didn't ask for this fight," she said firmly, "but I'm not walking away from it either." Progress was slow but real. Within months, new pilot programs were launched. Mandatory body cameras, de-escalation training, and civilian review boards. Small victories, perhaps, but symbolic ones. Communities began to feel a sliver of hope. One evening, Angela returned home to find Marcus cradling Justice, reading her a bedtime story. He looked up and smiled. She took her first step today. Angela froze, guilt washing over her. She had missed it. Tears welled in her eyes, but Marcus kissed her hand. "Don't carry this as failure. She will grow up knowing her mother changed the world." Later, as she held Justice in her arms, Angela whispered, "I promise, baby girl, I'll make this worth it." Weeks later, a mural appeared downtown, a giant painting of Angela holding Justice, her face strong and unyielding. Below it, in bold letters, read, "Dignity cannot be handcuffed." Crowds gathered to take photos, turning it into a landmark. Angela felt embarrassed at first, but Marcus reassured her, "It's not about your face, it's about what you stand for." Her journey culminated months later when she was invited to address Congress. Standing at the podium, she looked at the sea of lawmakers, cameras flashing, history watching. "I was once humiliated in a courtroom, treated as less than human," she began. "But what happened to me is not unique. Across this nation, dignity is denied daily. I am here not as a victim, but as a voice for mothers, fathers, children who deserve better." Her speech brought lawmakers to their feet. Even opponents nodded in reluctant respect. That night, as Angela tucked Justice into bed, Marcus whispered, "You've become more than a mother, more than a lawyer. You're a force." Angela smiled softly. "No, I'm just a woman who refused to stay silent. The force, that's all of us, together." And in that moment, surrounded by family and hope, Angela knew the fight was far from over, but she also knew they were finally, firmly, moving forward. Angela's speech before Congress did more than inspire applause. It unleashed a storm. Overnight, her face was everywhere. On morning news shows, on late-night commentary panels, across magazine covers. People began calling her the voice of justice, a nickname she never asked for but could not escape. At first, she tried to ignore the noise. She still had diapers to change, dinners to cook, and court cases to manage at her small law practice. But the attention followed her like a shadow. When she went grocery shopping, strangers thanked her. When she walked into her church, the congregation stood in applause. Even her old high school invited her back to speak to students. But with the praise came the critics. Online trolls filled her inbox with hate, twisting her words, mocking her family. Some called her a troublemaker. Others accused her of seeking fame. Angela read a few messages late at night, her chest tightening. Marcus gently closed her laptop and said, "Don't let the cowards steal your peace." Still, the weight pressed harder. At home, Justice had begun toddling around, babbling her first words. Angela realized she was missing too many of these moments, always on calls, always rushing to the next meeting. Guilt crept in. One evening, she broke down in Marcus's arms. "I'm trying to fight for the future, but I'm missing my daughter's present." He kissed her forehead. Maybe the fight and the present aren't separate. Maybe Justice's first words will be stronger because of the world you're building. Angela took that to heart. She began bringing Justice to events. At a community center in Baltimore, Justice waddled onto the stage, clutching Angela's finger. The crowd erupted in cheers. Photos of the moment went viral, captioned, "This is who we fight for." Meanwhile, Angela's role in the task force grew. She pushed for accountability measures that many thought impossible. Independent investigations into misconduct, federal oversight on local departments. Lobbyists pushed back, politicians stalled, but Angela refused to soften her stance. "If you're uncomfortable," she told one senator, "then maybe you're finally paying attention." Not everyone liked her bluntness. She received warnings from colleagues. "Tone it down or they'll shut you out." But Angela didn't believe in compromise when dignity was on the line. Her persistence bore fruit. Months later, a bill was introduced in Congress, nicknamed Justice's Law. It called for sweeping reforms in law enforcement transparency. Though it faced opposition, the fact it existed at all was monumental. Across the country, marches carried banners with her daughter's name, but the movement also became dangerous. One night, Marcus spotted graffiti on their garage door, "Go back where you belong." Another time, a stranger shouted slurs at Angela while she held Justice. Marcus's FBI contacts insisted on increased security, posting patrol cars outside their home. Angela hated it. "I don't want Justice to grow up behind fences," she told Marcus. "But she'll grow up safe," he replied firmly. Despite the threats, Angela kept speaking. She traveled to universities, churches, and town halls. Each place she heard new stories: fathers wrongfully jailed, daughters humiliated, mothers broken by loss. She carried those stories back with her, weaving them into every speech. One evening in Chicago, after a long forum, a teenage boy approached her. "Ms. Turner," he stammered, "I was thinking of quitting school, but after hearing you, I want to study law. I want to help people like you do." Angela's eyes filled with tears. She knelt, placed a hand on his shoulder, and said, "Then you already started helping." Moments like that reminded her why the exhaustion was worth it, but even heroes break. One night, after putting Justice to bed, Angela sat alone on the porch, staring at the stars. She whispered, "Am I really making a difference? Or just making noise?" Marcus joined her, handing her a mug of tea. "Look at the world," he said softly. "It's shaking. Shaking means something's moving, and you started it." Angela leaned into him, comforted by his faith. Weeks later, Angela received a call from the Department of Justice. They wanted her to chair a new federal commission on civil rights reform. It was the opportunity of a lifetime and a terrifying responsibility. She accepted. The announcement made headlines. Some celebrated her appointment as historic, others dismissed it as symbolic. Angela ignored both extremes. She reminded herself of her promise, to fight not for titles or applause, but for justice, and for justice. At the swearing-in ceremony, Angela held her daughter in one arm, raised her other hand, and repeated the oath. Cameras flashed. The moment was broadcast nationwide. For many, it was a symbol of hope. For Angela, it was simply another step on a long road. That night, as she tucked Justice into bed, Angela whispered, "You'll grow up in a world where dignity isn't questioned. That's my promise to you." Justice giggled, reaching up to touch her mother's face. In that small, tender moment, Angela felt the weight lift, just a little. The fight wasn't over, but she was no longer carrying it alone. The nation was carrying it with her, and deep down she knew history had only just begun writing her name. Angela's first day at the Federal Commission began before sunrise. She stood at the steps of a marble building in Washington, the cold air biting her cheeks. Cameras flashed as reporters shouted questions, but she kept her eyes forward. Marcus squeezed her hand before she entered. "Remember, you belong here," he whispered. Inside, the atmosphere was heavier than she imagined. Portraits of past leaders lined the walls, faces of mostly men, mostly white. Angela felt their eyes on her, questioning whether she deserved a place among them. She straightened her shoulders. "I'm not here for them," she reminded herself. "I'm here for justice, and for everyone like her." The first meeting was tense. Around the long mahogany table sat senators, federal judges, and senior law enforcement officials. Some nodded politely at Angela. Others avoided her gaze altogether. The chairperson, a seasoned politician, welcomed her but warned, "Progress here moves like stone. Slow, deliberate. Don't expect overnight change." Angela smiled faintly. "Stones can still crack," she replied. The room fell silent. A few smiled. Others frowned. It was clear. Angela would not play the role of a silent newcomer. Over the following weeks, Angela pushed the commission harder than anyone expected. She introduced proposals demanding independent oversight of police misconduct, harsher penalties for racial discrimination, and greater protection for whistleblowers. Each time she spoke, she blended legal knowledge with personal stories, the kind that silenced opposition. But Washington had its own games. Lobbyists began circling, offering her advice or subtle bribes disguised as donations. When she refused, they tried to discredit her. Anonymous articles appeared, claiming she was radical or unqualified. Late-night pundits mocked her. At home, the stress seeped in. Angela often returned past midnight, her eyes bloodshot, her voice hoarse. Marcus would leave dinner waiting, even reheated 3 times, because he knew she needed fuel more than words. Justice, now learning to run, sometimes cried when Angela left again the next morning. The guilt gnawed at her. One Friday, after a grueling week of debates, Angela collapsed onto the couch, whispering, "I don't know if I can keep doing this." Marcus knelt beside her. "You don't have to do it alone. Every soldier knows. They don't win battles solo. They win them with a unit." "Who's in your unit, Angela?" The words struck her. She realized she'd been carrying the fight as though it were hers alone. The next Monday, she called a private meeting with younger staffers, community organizers, and civil rights advocates. "If I fall," she told them, "someone has to keep moving forward. This isn't about me, it's about all of us." From then on, Angela's fight became more strategic. She built alliances with those who shared her vision, even convincing some skeptics. Her persistence began to shift the tone of the commission. Proposals once dismissed as too bold now had bipartisan support, but resistance remained fierce. During one high-profile hearing, a senior law enforcement official mocked her proposal for national police accountability. "This is fantasy," he sneered. Angela leaned forward, her voice steady. "Fantasy is believing trust can survive without accountability. Reality is the names etched on headstones because of men who thought like you." The room went still. Cameras caught every word. The clip went viral, replayed on every network. Millions cheered her courage. Critics doubled their attacks. But Angela didn't care. The truth had been spoken. As weeks turned into months, the cracks in the stone began to widen. The commission passed its first major recommendation: mandatory federal reviews of all excessive force cases. It was just a beginning, but it was more progress than anyone thought possible. That night, as Angela tucked Justice into bed, she whispered, "One day when you're older, you'll know that your name helped change laws." Justice giggled, unaware of the weight of her name, and pressed her tiny hand to her mother's cheek. Angela smiled through tears. Maybe that's enough for now, she thought. The next morning, Angela woke to news that would shake the country. A major city had announced sweeping reforms based on her commission's recommendations. It was the first domino. Others soon followed. And while Angela knew the fight was far from over, for the first time she believed victory was not just possible, it was inevitable. The victory in Washington gave Angela a taste of what was possible, but it also painted a target on her back. By early spring, whispers filled the Capitol. Powerful figures, angered by her success, plotted to shut her down. Anonymous leaks claimed she mishandled cases years ago. Headlines questioned her integrity. At one evening dinner, a senator leaned close and muttered, "You're making enemies faster than allies. Be careful." Angela didn't flinch. She had faced worse on the streets. She wouldn't break now. Still, she knew politics was not just about truth, it was about perception. And perception could destroy careers faster than facts. One Thursday morning, Angela entered the commission chamber to find it unusually crowded. Reporters lined the back, cameras already rolling. The chairperson announced a special review of Angela's conduct, a smear campaign, live on national television. They questioned her relentlessly. Why had she been at protests in her youth? Did she have bias against police officers? Had she used her position to advance radical agendas? Each question was designed not to uncover truth, but to paint her as dangerous. Angela listened, her heartbeat steady. When the floor finally turned to her, she rose. "My father taught me that silence in the face of injustice is complicity," she began. "If attending peaceful protests is evidence of bias, then so be it. I'm guilty. If fighting for accountability is radical, then I accept that label. But make no mistake, what we're doing here is not about me. It's about the people who can't speak because their voices were taken, and I will not apologize for carrying their stories into this room." The chamber erupted. Some clapped, others scowled, but the cameras caught every word and the public leaned in. By evening, Angela's speech was everywhere. Social feeds, news channels, even billboards. Instead of being silenced, her voice thundered louder than ever. That night at home, Marcus hugged her tightly. "They tried to bury you," he whispered, "but they forgot you're a seed." Angela smiled weakly. "Seeds only grow if they get water. Today the people gave me water." Still, the attacks didn't stop. A group of lobbyists launched ads portraying her as anti-police. Anonymous threats arrived in her email. Security around her house had to be increased. Even Justice's daycare raised concerns. The pressure was suffocating. One evening, as Angela prepared notes for another hearing, Justice toddled into the room, clutching a crayon drawing. "Mama," she said proudly, "it's you." The stick figure stood tall with a big smile, holding a sign that read, in shaky letters, "Justice." Angela's throat tightened. The drawing was messy, imperfect, but it reminded her why she endured. "Thank you, baby," she whispered, kissing her daughter's curls. "Mama's fighting for you." The following week brought an unexpected twist. A whistleblower, a young police officer, came forward with documents proving that some of Angela's loudest critics had been covering up misconduct for years. The revelations were explosive. Suddenly, those who had attacked her were on the defensive. During a televised session, Angela held up the documents. "This," she declared, "is why they tried to silence me, because they feared exposure, because they feared accountability, and because they feared change." The room fell into stunned silence. The chairperson, once cautious, leaned into his microphone and said simply, "Proceed, Commissioner." Momentum shifted. For the first time, Angela felt the tide truly turning. Cities across the country demanded oversight systems. Community leaders reached out to her for guidance. Even skeptics admitted she had staying power. Late one night, walking through the quiet Capitol halls, Angela paused beneath a massive American flag. She thought of her father, of every moment that had led here, the streets, the courtroom, the threats, the victories. And she whispered to herself, "We're not done yet." She knew the fight would never truly end. But for the first time, she also knew she wasn't fighting alone. Angela had survived the smear campaigns, the televised ambushes, and the relentless personal attacks. But now came the hardest stretch of all, the grinding exhaustion of fighting a system built to resist her at every turn. Every morning, she rose before dawn, kissed Marcus and Justice, and walked into the Capitol with her shoulders squared. Every evening, she returned home, carrying the weight of battles fought. Sometimes won, sometimes stalled. The opposition's tactics shifted. No longer relying only on smear campaigns, they began stalling her initiatives in committee rooms, burying reforms under endless amendments. Her proposals for independent review boards sat in legislative limbo, while lives outside continued to be shattered by unchecked abuse. Angela pressed on. She traveled to small towns, listening to grieving mothers and fathers whose children's names never made national headlines. She stood in church basements and school gymnasiums, promising them she hadn't forgotten. "Your stories matter," she told them. "Even when the cameras leave, I am still here." But the strain was immense. Marcus noticed the dark circles under her eyes, the way she sometimes stared silently at dinner, lost in thought. One night, he took her hand across the table. "Angela, you don't have to carry all of this alone," he said softly. She looked at him, her voice hoarse. "If I don't carry it, who will?" Marcus leaned closer. "We will, together. You, me, Justice, the people who believe in you. You're not a lone soldier, Angela. You're the tip of a spear." Those words lingered with her, and just in time, because the storm was about to break. 2 weeks later, Angela received a tip. A committee had scheduled a secret midnight vote to gut her reforms. If passed, it would strip her office of authority and undo years of progress. The plan was to move quietly, counting on fatigue and lack of attention, but Angela refused to let them bury it in darkness. She called her allies, contacted the press, and by the time the committee gathered, the room was packed, not only with politicians but with citizens who had traveled overnight to be there. Reporters' cameras clicked, live streams rolled, chants of "accountability now" echoed in the chamber. One senator slammed his gavel, furious. "This is highly irregular." Angela cut in firmly. "What's irregular is hiding votes that affect millions of lives. What's irregular is silencing the people whose voices you swore to serve. Tonight, we will have this conversation in the light." The debate raged for hours. Her opponents accused her of grandstanding. Her supporters pointed to the documents exposing corruption. Every blow aimed to wear her down, but Angela stood steady, her words sharp and unwavering. Near dawn, as exhaustion blanketed the room, the chairperson announced the final tally. The motion to gut her reforms had failed, by one vote. Cheers erupted. Citizens hugged each other, reporters scrambled to broadcast the breaking news, and Angela exhaled, feeling the pressure lift, if only slightly. When she stepped outside into the gray morning light, she was met by hundreds of supporters who had waited through the night. They cheered, held up signs, some even sang. For the first time in weeks, Angela let herself smile fully. An elderly woman stepped forward, her voice trembling with emotion. "My son died 5 years ago in custody. No one cared. But tonight, I feel like someone finally listened." Angela clasped the woman's hands. "I promise you, I won't stop." That night at home, Angela tucked Justice into bed. The little girl yawned and whispered, "Mama, are you a superhero?" Angela laughed softly, brushing hair from her daughter's forehead. "No, baby. I'm just your mama, trying to make things right." Justice smiled sleepily. "Then you're my hero." Angela sat in the quiet room long after her daughter drifted to sleep. The words pierced her heart, heavier than any title or applause. She knew she couldn't afford to crumble, not now. Too many eyes were on her, too many lives depended on her resolve. The battle wasn't over. The powerful still circled, waiting for their chance. But Angela had tasted something stronger than their opposition. She had tasted the power of people standing together, refusing to be ignored, and that, she realized, was unstoppable. The victory in that dawn-lit chamber rippled far beyond Capitol Hill. By mid-morning, Angela's name was on every news channel, every feed, every headline. "District Attorney stands against corruption." "Midnight vote exposed." Clips of her fiery words played on a loop, and the country leaned in to watch. But for Angela, this wasn't about headlines. It was about momentum. She knew the opposition wasn't defeated, only shaken. And momentum, like fire, had to be fed or it would die out. So she hit the road again. City to city, town to town, she held listening sessions. Churches opened their doors, union halls offered chairs, high school gyms filled with neighbors hungry to be heard. Some came to share grief, others to demand change, but all left feeling part of something larger than themselves. At one event in Atlanta, a young man stood trembling at the microphone. "I never told anyone this," he said, voice cracking. "But my brother was beaten during a traffic stop. He's still in a wheelchair. No one was ever held accountable." The room fell silent. Angela stepped forward, eyes steady on his. "Your brother's story matters," she said. "And tonight, Because you spoke, we will carry his story with us. You are not alone. That phrase, you are not alone, spread like wildfire. Supporters repeated it on signs, painted it on murals, tweeted it with Angela's speeches. It became the movement's heartbeat, but with visibility came danger. Threatening letters arrived at Angela's office, some scrawled with slurs, others veiled warnings. One evening, as she walked to her car, a black SUV slowed beside her, windows tinted. It lingered just long enough for her pulse to quicken before speeding off. Marcus was furious. "Enough is enough," he said, pacing the kitchen. "You need security detail around the clock. Justice needs to be safe. We need to be safe." Angela sighed. "If I build walls around myself, I become untouchable. And the people I'm fighting for can't afford walls." Marcus grabbed her hands, his tone softening. "Angela, you can't fight for them if you're not here. Let people protect you, so you can protect others." Reluctantly, she agreed. By the next week, a small team of trusted security professionals shadowed her movements. They were discreet, but their presence reminded her daily of the stakes. Then came the rally in Chicago. Tens of thousands gathered, spilling into streets, carrying candles and banners. Angela took the stage under a cold night sky, her voice echoing through loudspeakers. "This isn't just about one office, or one law, or one courtroom," she declared. "This is about every voice silenced, every family broken, every truth buried. They told us change was impossible, but look around, you are the change." The crowd roared, candles swaying like stars. For a moment, Angela felt invincible, lifted by the collective hope of so many. But as the rally ended, her team rushed her into a secure van. A credible threat had surfaced. Extremists planned to disrupt the gathering. Angela stared out the window at the glowing sea of candles fading into the night. "They can threaten us," she whispered, "but they can't extinguish that light." The next morning, Angela woke to something unexpected. An open letter signed by retired judges, military officers, and clergy. They praised her courage, condemning the smear campaigns and calling for national reform. "Angela Carter has shown us what integrity looks like in action," the letter read. "She deserves our protection and our support." The impact was immediate. Donations flooded in, volunteers signed up by the thousands, and for the first time, lawmakers who had remained silent began breaking ranks, aligning themselves with Angela's cause. Still, she remained wary. At a late-night strategy meeting, she told her team, "Momentum is fragile. If we celebrate too early, they'll seize the opening. We must keep pressing forward." Her warning proved timely. A week later, a high-profile opponent launched a smear ad campaign, painting Angela as dangerous, radical, and anti-police. The ads showed distorted footage, clipped to twist her words. Angela gathered her advisors. "We don't fight lies with more lies," she said firmly. "We fight them with truth." So instead of releasing counterattacks, she aired a simple ad. Angela standing in a quiet room, looking directly into the camera. "I am Angela Carter. I believe in accountability, in dignity, and in justice, not just for some, for all. If that makes me radical, then I stand proudly with the people." The ad went viral. Within days, it had more shares than the smear campaign ever could. And people weren't just supporting her, they were defending her, posting their own testimonies under the hashtag #StandWithAngela. One evening, Angela scrolled through the flood of stories on her phone. A mother thanking her for giving hope, a veteran promising to march alongside her, a teenager posting, "For the first time, I want to grow up to be like someone in politics." Angela's eyes welled with tears. She closed her phone, whispered into the quiet room, "This is bigger than me now." And she was right. What began as a defense against injustice had become a nationwide movement. The system that once seemed immovable was now trembling under the weight of collective demand. Angela Carter wasn't just fighting anymore. She was leading a revolution. Washington, D.C. was colder than usual, a biting wind sweeping across the National Mall. Yet despite the chill, thousands were gathering. Students, veterans, families, clergy. They came carrying banners with words like "Justice Now" and "You Are Not Alone." From above, the crowd looked like a living river, flowing toward the steps of the Capitol. Angela Carter watched from inside a modest van parked blocks away. The rhythmic chants reached her ears even through the glass. "They're here for more than me," she reminded herself. "They're here for themselves, for everyone silenced before." Marcus sat beside her, scrolling through updates on his phone. "Security says turnout's bigger than predicted. National networks are broadcasting live. And Angela, foreign press is here too. Angela drew in a steady breath. Then we speak not just to a country, but to the world. Her security detail signaled, and she stepped out. A wave of cheers surged through the crowd, phones lifted high to capture her arrival. She moved deliberately, shaking hands, meeting eyes, letting each person know they were seen. When she reached the podium, cameras swiveled, lights flared, reporters jostled for angles. Angela adjusted the microphone, her voice carrying clear over the restless wind. "They said we were too small to matter," she began, her tone calm yet firm. "They said our voices would fade. But today, look around you. This is the sound of a nation refusing to be ignored." The roar that followed shook the steps beneath her feet. She spoke of mothers who'd lost sons, of veterans denied dignity, of workers silenced by threats. She wove their stories into a tapestry of injustice too large to dismiss. "This is not just about laws," she said, her hand slicing the air. "It is about lives, and lives demand accountability." As she spoke, cameras captured something remarkable. Police officers assigned to monitor the rally were lowering their batons, standing respectfully as citizens chanted around them. Some even nodded, quietly acknowledging the truth in Angela's words. But inside the Capitol, powerful figures watched nervously from windows and screens. Senator Holloway, one of Angela's fiercest opponents, muttered to an aide, "She's turning this into a revolution. If we don't contain her, we lose control." Containment came swiftly. As Angela finished her speech, Capitol security announced new restrictions. The rally must disperse within the hour, citing safety concerns. Angela's team bristled. "This is intimidation," one advisor hissed. "They're trying to break momentum." Angela raised her hand for silence. "Then we leave as we came, with dignity." She stepped down, shook hands, and personally thanked volunteers. The crowd began to thin peacefully, but the message lingered in the air like thunder. That night, Angela sat in a hotel room overlooking the city. She replayed the footage on television, the sea of people, the banners, the faces alight with determination. She felt both humbled and restless. "We can't let this fade into another headline," she whispered. Marcus placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It won't. You lit a fire. Now we channel it." The next morning, her team unveiled the plan. Angela would introduce a sweeping reform bill before Congress. It called for independent oversight of law enforcement, protections for whistleblowers, and stronger accountability for abuses of power. The bill faced immediate backlash. Opponents called it dangerous, overreach, even un-American. Talk radio raged, and lobbyists funneled millions into defeating it. Yet support from the public only grew louder. Every rally, every town hall, every candlelit vigil amplified the demand, pass the Carter bill. When the day of the congressional hearing arrived, the Capitol was once again surrounded by citizens. Inside, Angela sat at a long table, papers neatly stacked before her. Across the room, her critics prepared to dismantle her with questions and accusations. Senator Holloway leaned into his microphone, his voice dripping with disdain. "Ms. Carter, isn't it true that your so-called reforms would handcuff law enforcement and endanger national security?" Angela met his gaze, unflinching. "Senator, what endangers national security is corruption left unchecked. A system that punishes the innocent while protecting the powerful is not security. It is injustice disguised as order." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Holloway sputtered, shuffled his notes, but Angela pressed on. She outlined data, recited testimonies, and painted a clear vision of accountability. By the time she finished, even some skeptics sat in thoughtful silence. Outside, the chants grew louder. "Justice now! Pass the bill!" News outlets captured the moment live. Commentators called it historic, a turning point. One anchor declared, "We may be witnessing the birth of a new era in American justice." That evening, Angela returned to her hotel, exhausted but resolute. Marcus greeted her with a rare smile. "You did it. You shifted the ground beneath their feet." Angela sank into a chair, her voice barely above a whisper. "This isn't my victory. It's ours. And the fight has only just begun." From the streets below, faint echoes of chanting still rose, carried by the night wind. The movement had not ended with her speech. It had only grown stronger. Angela Carter wasn't just a prosecutor anymore. She was the face of a movement reshaping the soul of a nation. The Carter bill had ignited something Washington hadn't seen in decades. Across the country, families gathered in living rooms, classrooms paused lessons, and even small-town diners left televisions on, tuned to news coverage about the fight unfolding in Congress. For once, policy wasn't buried in jargon. It was personal, raw, alive. Angela Carter felt the weight of it as she walked the long marble corridors of the Capitol. Every step echoed against history. Marcus kept pace beside her, carrying a binder filled with letters of support, handwritten notes from veterans, parents, and ordinary citizens. "They'll try to bury this today," Marcus said, his voice low. "Procedural tricks, amendments, maybe even stall tactics. But if we keep the spotlight on, they won't succeed." Angela nodded, steady but inwardly bracing. "Then we fight with truth. No more, no less." When the committee reconvened, the room buzzed with tension. Journalists packed the back rows, cameras ready to broadcast every flicker of expression. Senators shuffled papers, some already scowling, others leaning forward with cautious curiosity. Chairman Whitmore tapped the gavel. "We convene today to deliberate the Carter bill. Ms. Carter, you may begin." Angela rose, her voice clear but warm. She spoke not of abstractions but of people. "This bill is not about politics. It is about the father who never came home, the daughter silenced in fear, the communities who lost trust in those sworn to protect them. It is about restoring faith in justice." She held up a photograph, an elderly man who'd written to her, describing how his grandson had been wrongfully arrested. "He told me, 'I love this country, but it no longer loves me back.' Senators, laws cannot mend hearts, but they can protect them." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. Some senators shifted uncomfortably. Others glanced toward the cameras, aware the nation was watching. Then came Senator Holloway's turn. His words were sharp, rehearsed. "This bill is reckless. It handcuffs officers, weakens deterrence, and panders to emotional outcry rather than reason." He leaned forward, sneering. "Tell me, Ms. Carter, do you value criminals' comfort more than citizens' safety?" Angela didn't flinch. She spoke slowly, each word deliberate. "What I value, Senator, is the Constitution. What I value is a system where no man or woman is above the law. Safety without accountability is not safety. It is tyranny dressed as order." For a moment, Holloway faltered. The cameras caught it. The room hung in silence. That clip would replay endlessly on the evening news. As the day wore on, senators debated, amendments were proposed and struck down, and reporters rushed to deliver updates. Outside, the steps of the Capitol filled again. Citizens waved flags, carried portraits of loved ones, and chanted Angela's name. When Angela finally stepped outside, she was met with a sea of faces. Someone handed her a megaphone. The crowd hushed, waiting. She lifted it slowly. "This isn't about me," she said, her voice echoing over the plaza. "This is about all of us. They can argue in chambers, but out here we show them the truth, that justice belongs to the people." Thunderous cheers shook the night. Back inside, Angela and Marcus returned to their modest hotel room. The television flickered with pundits debating odds, polls showing surging support, and clips of everyday Americans declaring their faith in the Carter bill. Angela collapsed onto the edge of the bed. Marcus placed a cup of tea in her hand. "Tomorrow's the vote," he said. "You've done all you can." Angela stared out the window where the Capitol dome glowed under spotlights. She murmured, "The people have done all they can. I'm just carrying their voices into that chamber." The next morning, streets were barricaded. Crowds swelled larger than before, spilling into avenues, holding candles and banners. National Guard units lined the perimeter, not in confrontation but in quiet respect. Inside the Senate, tension was palpable. The roll call began. One by one, senators cast their votes. Each name echoed like a drumbeat, suspense building. Angela sat in the gallery, her hands clasped tightly. Marcus whispered, "It's close, too close." When the final name was called, the chamber erupted. Reporters sprinted for phones, aides whispered frantically. The Carter bill had passed, by a margin of just 2 votes. Angela felt her chest tighten, a rush of relief flooding her. Tears stung her eyes as the crowd outside roared, news spreading like wildfire. She rose, hands trembling, and whispered a single word to herself. Justice. That night, as she addressed supporters under the glow of Capitol lights, Angela's voice rang out with conviction. "This is not the end. This is the beginning. We have shown that truth cannot be silenced, that justice cannot be delayed forever, and together we will keep building a nation worthy of its promise. The people roared back, their voices uniting into a single sound that carried across Washington. For once, power felt as if it truly belonged to the people. And Angela Carter, the woman once humiliated in handcuffs, now stood as the face of a movement that had changed history. The Senate chamber had emptied, but the weight of history lingered in the marble walls. Angela Carter stood quietly in the gallery, gazing down at the rows of polished desks where moments earlier democracy had spoken. The Carter bill had passed, yet she felt no triumphal music, only the profound stillness that comes when something larger than oneself has begun to shift. Marcus joined her, his voice low. "You realize what just happened, right? They'll be teaching about this day in schools." Angela shook her head, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "If they do, I hope they don't remember me. I hope they remember the people who filled the streets, who refused to be silent." Outside, those very people were still chanting. Candlelight vigils had given way to spontaneous celebrations. Drums echoed, voices sang freedom hymns, and strangers embraced as though united by a long-awaited victory. The Capitol dome glowed above them, not as a distant monument, but as a beacon of possibility. Angela and Marcus stepped outside into the sea of supporters. A young girl, no older than 12, tugged at Angela's sleeve. "Miss Carter?" she whispered, clutching a small photo. "This is my brother. He was hurt by police last year. Thank you for fighting for him." Angela knelt, her heart twisting. She took the photo carefully, her voice steady though her throat tightened. "You hold on to hope, sweetheart. That's stronger than any law." Cameras caught the exchange, and by morning, it would circle the nation. But in that moment, Angela was not performing for an audience. She was simply a woman carrying the grief and faith of millions. The following days blurred into a whirlwind. News anchors hailed the Carter bill as a turning point. Editorials debated its impact. Critics predicted chaos, while supporters proclaimed rebirth. Angela, however, felt the weight of responsibility deepen. Passing a bill was one thing. Ensuring its enforcement was another. She sat in her modest apartment late at night, papers spread across the table, drafting guidelines, fielding calls, preparing for battles still ahead. Marcus placed a hand on her shoulder. "You need rest." She shook her head. "The system doesn't sleep, neither can I." Yet beneath her exhaustion burned determination. She remembered the humiliation of being handcuffed, the smirk of the officer who thought her powerless. That image fueled her resolve. Never again, not for her, not for anyone. Soon stories poured in from across the country. Departments beginning reforms, families daring to hope, but also backlash, protests by police unions, fiery speeches from opponents. The battle had shifted terrain but was far from over. One evening, Angela appeared on national television for a primetime interview. The host leaned forward. "Ms. Carter, your bill has been called both revolutionary and reckless. What do you say to critics who claim it undermines law enforcement?" Angela met the camera head-on, her tone unwavering. "This law doesn't undermine law enforcement. It protects it, by ensuring the badge is never used as a weapon against the innocent. True strength is accountability." The clip went viral. Even skeptics found themselves moved by her clarity, but with fame came danger. Anonymous threats flooded her inbox. Strange cars idled near her home. Marcus grew increasingly protective. "Promise me you'll let security handle this." Angela hesitated. "If I live in fear, they win. But I'll be careful." Weeks later, she was invited back to Capitol Hill for a ceremonial signing. The president himself prepared to put pen to paper. As Angela stood beside him, flashbulbs flashing, she felt the moment crystallize. Her father's service, her own scars, the voices of countless families, all of it converged into this instant. The president smiled, holding up the signed bill. "This is not just legislation, this is a declaration that justice in America is not negotiable." Applause thundered. Angela blinked back tears, not of sorrow, but of resolve. That night, she walked the quiet streets of Washington. The city hummed with life, but Angela felt alone with her thoughts. She passed a group of young activists holding signs, chanting still. One recognized her and called out, "We're with you, Ms. Carter." Angela raised a fist gently in solidarity. "And I'm with you," she replied. Back in her apartment, she finally allowed herself a rare moment of stillness. She looked out the window at the Capitol dome, luminous against the night sky. "This isn't the end," she whispered to herself. It's the beginning. For Angela Carter, the journey from humiliation to history had come full circle. She had been dragged, mocked, silenced, and yet she stood, and because she stood, countless others would rise. Justice had found its champion. The ink on the Carter bill was barely dry when the first storm erupted. In a small Midwestern city, a viral video surfaced. A young black man shoved against a squad car, pleading for breath as officers laughed. The clip spread across social media like wildfire, reigniting outrage. Angela Carter watched the footage from her office, her hands trembling but her jaw set. This was exactly why the law existed. Yet she knew, paper and promises meant little without action. Within hours, reporters swarmed outside her building. "Miss Carter, what will you do about this?" one shouted. Angela faced the cameras, steady as ever. The Carter bill was written for moments like this. Accountability will not wait. If local authorities fail to act, federal oversight begins now. Her words crackled across networks, drawing both cheers and fury. Supporters filled streets with chants of "Justice now," while critics accused her of power grabs. The nation held its breath, watching whether this new law would bend or break under pressure. Angela and Marcus flew to the city the next morning. As they landed, crowds lined the airport, half cheering her name, half jeering with angry signs. Police unions had mobilized, claiming the bill demonized officers. But Angela knew the truth. This was not about demonizing, but about protecting. At City Hall, she convened a tense meeting with the mayor, police chief, and federal monitors. The air was thick with hostility. "This law is federal overreach," the police chief barked. "You can't just storm into our jurisdiction." Angela leaned forward, voice calm but cutting. "Your officers put a man in the hospital while cameras rolled. Do you really want to argue over jurisdiction, or over the fact the world saw injustice in your streets?" The mayor shifted uneasily. The chief glared but said nothing. Outside, protesters clashed with counter-protesters. Marcus scanned the chaos nervously. "This city's about to explode." Angela exhaled slowly. "Then we give them a reason to believe in the system before they stop believing altogether." She walked out onto the courthouse steps where thousands had gathered. Microphones thrust toward her, faces turned expectantly. Angela raised her voice, clear and resolute. "This law is not a weapon against police. It is a promise to the people. Every uniform, every badge, every office must be accountable to justice. That begins today, right here." The crowd erupted. Tears streamed down faces. Even some officers shifted uncomfortably, reminded of the oath they had once taken. That night, Angela returned to her hotel, exhaustion etched into her features. Marcus watched her pore over case files until dawn. "You're carrying the weight of a nation," he murmured. She looked up, eyes blazing. "I'm carrying the weight of every handcuffed soul who was told they didn't matter. I won't drop it now." The next morning, federal monitors announced charges against the officers in the video. The news spread instantly. Streets that had been on edge erupted into celebration. For once, people saw consequences, not cover-ups. Angela stood at the window of her hotel, listening to the chants below. "This is just the beginning," she whispered. Yet she also knew the risks. Powerful enemies were already circling. Politicians vowed repeal. Commentators predicted unrest. But Angela Carter had weathered humiliation, survived threats, and turned pain into power. She was ready for every storm to come. The morning after the indictments, Angela Carter woke to a storm she had long expected. Newspapers screamed with headlines. Cities divided over Carter bill. Police unions revolt. Angela Carter, hero or tyrant? Marcus slid a stack of articles across the table. "They're painting you as a threat to law enforcement itself." Angela skimmed the pages, her expression calm though her chest tightened. She knew the playbook. When truth rattled power, power struck back harder. By noon, her security team intercepted an anonymous threat, a letter promising that she would end up in the ground like the ones you claim to defend. The words were crude, but the message was clear. Still, Angela refused to retreat. "If they're afraid of accountability," she said, "that means it's finally working." That afternoon, she addressed Congress in an emergency session. The chamber was packed, tension thick. Some lawmakers sat with folded arms, waiting for her to stumble. Others leaned forward, desperate for her to succeed. Angela's voice cut through the silence. "We are not at war with police. We are at war with injustice. The badge should represent safety, not fear. If that frightens people in power, then perhaps they should question why." The chamber buzzed. Cameras captured her every word, broadcasting to millions. For some, she was a savior. For others, an enemy. Later, as she exited the Capitol, a mob of protesters surged. Signs screamed, "Back the blue," and "Repeal the Carter Bill." Police formed barriers, but the shouts were deafening. Suddenly, a man lunged forward, hurling a glass bottle that shattered against a barrier inches from Angela's head. Marcus grabbed her arm, pulling her into the car. Sirens wailed as they sped away. Back at her office, Angela sat in silence, the adrenaline slowly draining. Marcus finally spoke. "They're not just resisting, Angela. They're escalating. You need to be careful." Angela met his gaze. "If I back down now, what do I tell the families? That threats matter more than justice? No, we keep going." That evening, she appeared on national television. Under bright studio lights, she spoke directly to the people. "This fight isn't about me. It's about every parent who fears their child won't come home. It's about every citizen who deserves dignity. And it's about officers who risk their lives with honor, who are shamed when others abuse the badge. We can't let fear decide whether justice stands." Millions watched. Hashtags surged online. Messages of support flooded her inbox. But so did the hate. The nation was polarized, yet undeniably engaged. Meanwhile, in the small Midwestern city where the viral video had begun, something unexpected happened. Officers who had stayed silent before now stepped forward, offering testimony against their own colleagues. "We were tired of covering for them," one admitted. "The law gave us the courage." When Angela heard, her eyes welled. "This is what change looks like," she whispered. But not everyone shared her vision. That night, intelligence reports warned of coordinated protests planned outside federal buildings. Some groups were calling for Angela's resignation. Others whispered of violence. Marcus frowned as he read the briefings. "They're trying to break you, Angela." She closed her eyes for a moment, weary but unshaken. "Then they'll have to try harder, because the people this law protects, they've been broken for centuries. It's time someone else felt the pressure." The next morning, Angela walked into her office past throngs of reporters. Her shoulders were squared, her stride firm. She knew history didn't move without resistance. Every step forward demanded a sacrifice. But Angela Carter had already decided. She would pay whatever price justice required. The sun rose over Washington with an uneasy glow, painting the city in muted gold. Outside the Department of Justice, hundreds had gathered. Some carried banners demanding Angela Carter's resignation. Others raised signs that read, "Justice now," and "Stand with Carter." The air vibrated with chants, anger, and hope colliding in the same space. Angela watched from her office window. The crowd wasn't just protesting her. They were protesting the soul of the nation. Every decision she made, every word she spoke, seemed to split the country down the middle. Marcus entered, setting down a folder thick with reports. "Arrests were made last night in 3 cities. Counter-protests are growing. They're saying the Carter Bill is tearing the nation apart." Angela turned, her eyes steady. "No, it's exposing what's already been broken. We can't heal what we refuse to see." Just then, her phone buzzed. It was the president. After a brief exchange, she hung up, her jaw tightening. "They want me to address the nation tonight. Live." Marcus frowned. "That's a gamble. One wrong word and they'll crucify you." Angela nodded. "Or one right word and we change history." All day she prepared. Advisors circled with drafts, poll numbers, sound bites. She pushed them aside. "This isn't about politics, it's about truth. I'll speak from the heart." When night fell, the nation tuned in. Living rooms, diners, bars, every screen flickered to Angela standing at a podium, the American flag behind her. Her voice was calm but carried steel. "My name is Angela Carter, and I am not afraid. I know some call me dangerous, a threat to the way things are. They're right, because the way things are has failed too many for too long." She paused, letting the silence stretch. Across the country, people leaned closer. "This bill isn't about punishing police. It's about honoring them by demanding integrity. It's about families who bury loved ones without justice. It's about children who learn to fear sirens instead of feeling safe. And it's about every officer who wears the badge with pride, who deserves not to be tainted by the corruption of a few." Her tone softened. "I am not here to divide. I am here to heal. But healing requires honesty, and honesty requires courage." She leaned forward, her eyes burning into the cameras. "So tonight I ask you, Not as citizens of different races, not as members of different parties, but as Americans. Stand with me. Stand with justice. Stand with truth. The broadcast ended. For a moment, silence blanketed the nation. Then, in city squares, in homes, in crowded bars, applause erupted. Hashtags exploded online. Supporters flooded the streets, chanting her name. But opposition hardened too. Police unions staged walkouts. Governors threatened lawsuits. The divide widened even as the vision of justice gained ground. The next morning, Angela arrived at her office to find something unexpected. On the steps of the Department of Justice, rows of uniformed officers stood at attention. They weren't protesting, they were saluting. Their spokesperson, a decorated veteran named Captain Ruiz, stepped forward. "We may not agree on everything, ma'am, but we believe in accountability. We believe the badge must mean honor, and we believe you are right to demand it." Angela's throat tightened. She returned the salute, tears burning her eyes. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment. By evening, the image of officers saluting Angela Carter had circled the globe. In the week